Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Record. Today we are sitting with Mr. Dave Pomeroy, who's the president of the Nashville Musicians Association, or what most of us call the Union. This is only one of our first few episodes back since everything started opening back up, and I'm incredibly excited to sit down with Mr. Pomeroy. Dave, thank you so much for talking to us.
Hey, my pleasure. Glad to be able to be in the same room.
Yeah. So most of the time I start these interviews with a sort of the viewer has already watched or read or is aware of the person that I'm talking to. And I'm sure a lot of the viewers do know who you are. But I think instead of skipping that information for this interview, it's going to be, I think, very informative for the viewer to understand your background and where you're coming from, because I think that's going to inform the conversation later. So can you give us just a little of how you got to be in Nashville for 40 plus years and the president of one of the strongest musician unions in the world?
Well, thanks for asking, and it's certainly been an interesting journey. I was a military kid. I was born in Italy, and when I was about 5 years old, we moved to England, and we lived in England for 3 years from 1961 to 64. And right in the middle of that, a whole bunch of stuff started happening on the television with guys running around, with long hair and having fun and top of the pops. And I was fascinated. I never had any idea it could be a job, or I just fell in love with the Beatles like everyone else just a couple years earlier because I was in England at the time. And we came back to the States when I was about 8, and we moved to Northern Virginia. My dad was stationed at the Pentagon in various jobs. Okay. And so I started, just kind of doing what kids do in those kind of neighborhoods. I took piano lessons, and then I was in the school orchestra playing clarinet. But then in the 5th grade, they started a string orchestra. And I got it in my mind, maybe because I really loved Jello, that I wanted to play the cello. And so I showed up, and asked the leader, the string teacher, if I could play cello. And she said, well, we have lots of cello players already, but we don't have many bass players, and you have big hands. You could play the bass. I'm like, wow, what's the bass? Sure. And, turned around, and there it was, and I've been in love ever since. That's awesome. And I kind of fell out of that world, switched into electric bass, and started playing in bands all through high school, and rock and roll bands, and getting into a little bit of jazz fusion kind of stuff, and a lot of notes. Yeah. And then I went to 2 years at University of Virginia, and my second year I got into the first ever folk trio I was in. Okay. And there was no lead guitar player, so I was still playing lots of notes. Yeah. And it was a good experience because we were actually working, and I'm thinking, I don't need to, this is the wrong school. They don't really teach music the way that I'm thinking of it. Okay. And hey, my dad's stationed in Belgium, so I got a free trip to Europe, so I'll go to London and be a rock star. So at the age of 20, I quit school. I went over to Belgium, and where my dad was at NATO, and stayed there for a couple months, saving up a little money. I was a part-time painter, and I went to London knowing one person, a guy named Gary, who I'd met in Belgium. He was the son of an English officer. Okay. And I called him up, and I got a place to stay, and I bought a newspaper, the music paper, the Melody Maker, and got an audition the next day and got the gig. Wow. Watched the old bass player play Friday night. Saturday night did my first gig, and then Monday went to the immigration department and applied for a work permit. After I'd been there for like 4 days. Wow. And so I got the work permit, and I stayed there for a year, and I starved for the most part, but it was an incredible life experience in terms of, being in a music center like London. We went in one band, we went and played a month in Copenhagen. So I was still chasing my dream. It hadn't really turned out like I thought it would, where I was going to, be the next John Entwistle or Chris Squire or Jack Bruce, But what happened was I had to come back to the States, and I thought, well, New York, LA, or Nashville. Okay. And I didn't know anybody in New York or LA, and I knew one person in Nashville, Mary Riles, the singer I'd played with in Virginia in college. She had moved here and said, hey, come check it out. So I came here for a couple of weeks, and 43 years later, now I'm the president of the Musicians Union. It is hard to imagine how it happened. At that point, when I moved here, I really thought, I didn't know there were any other jobs besides being in a band that people liked. I just kind of thought that was what you did. Right. And so I learned very quickly about being a sideman. I learned very quickly about songwriters and how you had to learn how to play behind them and not over top of them. Yeah. And I had great education right off the bat. My first gig was with a guy named Sleepy LaBeef, kind of rockabilly roots music legend,
Yeah.
who taught me so many songs, and without a single chart or a single rehearsal. He would just play them and you had to follow. And it was a great education. I was on the road with him for almost a year.
Wow.
Came back, started playing. On a fluke, I met Guy Clark's drummer, and he got me the gig with Guy, and which very quickly turned into a gig with the same variation of a band with Guy Clark and Billy Joe Shaver kind of simultaneously, which was really an interesting yin yang of Texas songwriting. And again, learning, especially from Guy, just how to sit there and support and listen. Because the first time I ever sat with him and heard these songs, it was all I could do to scratch out a chart, because the words were just so powerful and the chords were so simple, but it was so great. So that prepared me for what was my big break, which was playing with Don Williams. I knew some of the guys in the band. I got a chance to do that. And Don was amazing. I was with him full time for 14 years and ended up, writing songs with him, playing on his records. He got us a record deal. We put out a little record in 1982 that, it's like, I was ready to retire. It's like, man, I got my picture on the front cover of a record. What else is going to happen?
We'll get a shot of that.
Yeah. But Don was like the perfect entry to a much broader view of the music business, and he treated us really well, and I kind of didn't understand that not everybody else got treated that way. And so as I got more involved with Don and making, we're all networking and making friends and playing on demo sessions and building up this thing, being with Don was like a badge of quality. It was like people knew if you played in Don Williams' band, you had to be, you knew how to play a song.
Right.
And so with Don, I was really able to develop that over a really slow period of time. And I started playing on records about 5-6 years into my time with him. The first I played on Don's album, New Moves, in I think 86. And then things started picking up steam. Keith Whitley, I played on Keith's last few records, which were really the game changer for me, because I was playing electric upright bass and nobody was doing anything like that at the time. And it sort of gave me an identity, which as a bass player is not, and then of course they immediately want to put you in that box. But as things developed and I got more into the studio work, I began to get involved in something called the RMA, which was the recording musicians branch of the union within the union. And things were changing. The business was changing. And it suddenly became aware to a few of us that, we were not keeping up with the times, not just Nashville, but the union wasn't. And there were everything was changing, the way people recorded. And so I got more and more involved, and I ended up getting on the executive board of the local. And then we got to a certain crossroads where our leadership kind of drank the Kool-Aid that the AFM president was selling at that time. And it was sort of like, oh man, we got to do something. Isn't somebody going to do something? Who's going to do something? Who's going to do something? And and it ended up being me. And it was a very interesting journey, because, Harold Bradley was my predecessor, and I had worked with Harold very much, and a great respect for him and his brother. But it was sort of like, hey, it's time for us to get a chance to do things. And so, and I'm very grateful that after that election, and then a year later when we voted out the AFM leadership, and suddenly it was a much improved union, much more reflective of working musicians, I was able to mend that fence with Harold, and we were in very good, we were close again. And that in fact, the picture up there of the Harold's 92nd birthday, he's in the center of the session player picture. It's actually my attempt to emulate the Great Day in Harlem picture that's up above us here. That's kind of my version. It's a lot of the session folks, but Harold, understood later, that it was time. So all these things happen over in a very gradual way, and one thing led to another, and I can say that some of the more off-the-wall, unusual things that I did and choices I made ended up being things that really made a huge difference in my career and my life. And so what I try to tell young musicians is you got to keep listening to that inner voice, whatever you want to call it, your gut, your heart, up above, whatever it means to you. Listen to that, because if you stop listening, it will stop talking one day. And those most off-the-wall ideas are the things that led to a lot of great things in my life, including the chance to help musicians, which is what we're doing here.
Well, I think that actually leads us perfectly into my next question, which is I know that there are a lot of people, especially outside of Nashville, who only have maybe a hazy understanding of what the union actually does. We see references in movies here and there about this musicians union that used to have almost a mobster persona at one point, and but can we kind of clear the haze a little bit and talk about what the union does?
Yeah, thank you for asking, because it is, the stereotype drives me crazy.
Right.
You know, what I say, the simplest way to put it is that the Musicians Union, which was founded in 1896, founded here in Nashville in 1902, promotes respect for musicians and the work they create. That's the simplest way to put it. But it operates on a lot of levels because without some sort of collective voice, it's you against the world, you against the music business, which is not always a great place to be. And there certainly are many roads to success. What the union does is we create and maintain and negotiate standards of how work should be handled. Here in Nashville, recording has always been our key business. Mm-hmm. The live gigs are very hard to monitor, very hard to control. You can make money playing live in Nashville, but the musicians that started, recording here back in the 40s and the 50s when they built the first studios, to me, what's made Nashville different is that Owen Bradley and Chet Atkins, who were hired by Decca and RCA to run those labels, they basically said, okay, here's how we do it around here. We do it on a union contract and we take care of our people. These are our friends. Yeah. We're going to be working with them on Saturday night down at the country club. We're going to have to look them in the eye. Yeah. And so Nashville has always had this tradition of respect for creators and songwriters. There's no other community of songwriters like there are here. And the musicians, I came up through that with my songwriter friends. I have so many folks that they were unknown, I was unknown, but we ended up in the studio together. And the next thing you know, 10 years later, we're looking at each other and going, wow, can you believe all that happened? Right. But it really is, we try to use the strength in numbers to find ways to create value because, I certainly understand that it's a value proposition. Anything you buy, our dues are about $275 a year. Now we have a fully equipped rehearsal hall with a grand piano, drum set, backline, PA that you can have for free if you reserve it. You can spend $275 in one day at a professional rehearsal studio, but we have all the gear. People use it. We're having a Randy Travis band reunion there tomorrow. The guys are meeting. And so we have that. We have discounts with everybody from ATT to Liberty Mutual. We've worked on downtown parking scenarios where no matter how high the hockey game price is, it's still $5 to park at McKendree Garage. Okay. We work with the city in a bunch of different ways. And we monitor intellectual property. This is the thing that is so important that people who just say, oh yeah, sure, man, $100, great. Okay, how many songs you want me to play on? Yeah. And, like for example, Mazda used a Patsy Cline record from 1962 for 2 years for an ad campaign a 3 years ago. Okay. 90-year-old violin player named Soli Fott came in and picked up a check for $2,000 when he got paid $58 in 1962. And that's what intellectual property is. We're now, we administer various residual funds. One is based on the amount of work you do. You get kind of a bonus based on the last sound recording special payments. It's a 5-year window that keeps moving, and as long as you're working, you get these little bonus payments for the work that you've done that was under a union contract. Okay. Master sessions. And then we have the Film Secondary Markets Fund, which is huge. It pays out $80-90 million a year. If you play it on a record that gets into a movie that has an AFM covered soundtrack, the musicians share 1% of the post-theater revenue for all time, beneficiaries and everything. Wow. And then we also have this fund that I'm a trustee of called the AFM SAG-AFTRA Fund, which is between us and the Singers Union. And Sound Exchange collects money from, satellite radio, Sirius, Pandora, almost $1 billion a year, and it trickles down, and we distribute 5% of that money to backup musicians and backup singers. And we distributed $62 million last year. Wow. And so if you're playing on some records, or if you played on records a while ago that are still getting played on satellite radio, you get a really nice taste.
That's
And so those kind of things, it's we have yet to bring anybody up on charges. In my 13 years as president here, the way I put it to my friends in New York and LA is, this doesn't work in Nashville. This is how we do it in Nashville, and it makes a difference. That's the way. And I also, my bass player perspective, haunts all of this as well, because most negotiations are like, you're over here, it's somewhere here, and it's like, you're rushing, you're dragging, it's right here in the middle, it's right here. You got to trust the bass player a little bit. So I if I didn't have those musical analogies for some of this stuff, I'd go out of my mind.
Well, a couple follow-ups to that. I also know that the Musicians Union does a lot with pension and disability assistance when a musician gets disabled. And, we won't harp too much about, here's how we're going to try to sell you on the union. But I did want to kind of supplement what you said with that a little bit, because I think a musician who moves to Nashville, who's, in their early 20s, is not thinking about a retirement plan or a pension plan.
Absolutely.
But I just wanted to kind of bring that in.
No, that's great. I'm glad you did. Yeah, every AFM contract, almost without exception, has a pension component for it. The Nashville Symphony and the Grand Ole Opry, that we negotiate both those contracts. And it's usually in the neighborhood of 10 to 12%. Sometimes with the symphony, it's a little less because there's so many people. Sure. But the pension fund has been in existence since about 1960, and it is really a game changer because, as musicians get older, and, I'm at the age now where I'm, thinking about taking Social Security, but I haven't done so, thinking about taking my pension, but I haven't done so. But for musicians who, are going to need help in their later stages of life, and in some cases it could be bigger, the pension could be bigger than the Social Security check that you're getting, because, some of the sessions, if you get on a roll with sessions, if you do television shows, we also have agreements where if you're with a touring act, that you can sign an agreement where a certain portion of your wages will go into your pension, and you're basically putting money away. And thankfully, in the first piece of legislation that came along with the new administration in Washington, the American Rescue Act refunded our pension to make it solvent, because it was having some challenges due to circumstances beyond any one person's control with economics and the stock market and so on. So along with a lot of other pensions, ours was restored, and because we were in danger of having cuts. But everything that goes on a union contract helps the future, and it pays forward for the next generation. So that's a really important thing. Locally, we do have an emergency relief fund. If a member has a medical problem, anything that prevents them from working, they can apply for assistance. We have a confidential committee that looks at it. Because people, don't want to have their private business out there. So, but they can get up to $2,500 as not a loan. It's a grant. And then we also created, when we had the Nashville flood in 2010, we created the Flood Relief Fund, which we've now changed the name because we never knew there would be more stuff. I should have thought of that. But now we had to, and it took a year to get the IRS to approve the name change. But it's now the Crisis Assistance Fund, which means we won't ever have to change the name again.
Tornadoes.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, we started changing it after the second tornado, and then COVID hit. So. So those kind of things, and we do, and we're real involved in the community with schools. The Metro schools bring all the ninth graders into the convention center, and they have every kind of vocation you can imagine. And we set up a little booth, and we're playing, and the kids come up and ask questions. What skills do you need to be in the music business? And it's really interesting to interact with kids of that age, and you really see the importance of education. You can see the disparity in the skills of some of these kids. And I, not to get off topic, but it's like my parents taught us that you have to have a good vocabulary. You have to learn how to express yourself, how to ask questions. And it's really, it concerns me that we need to put more energy and money into our schools. So we we anytime we can jump in and help with school stuff, we always
Awesome.
will. You know, kindergarten to graduates.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to try to ask some questions to fill in the blanks here for people who, excuse me, who might again be from all the way across the country and maybe have never worked a session or
Sure.
something like that. And I'm going to tie this into another interview that I did with Brent Mason a while back because, of course, we all I think most of us know who Brent Mason is,
Yeah.
and you know he's made a living doing the session work that we talked about.
Yeah, we kind of came
And
up through that
yeah,
through those ranks together. And
yeah, and in our interview, Brent mentioned making union rate,
yeah,
and you touched on this a little bit, but
right.
I kind of want to explain like I'm five a little bit
Okay.
about what union rate is and how it works, and it's not just for session work, correct?
Yeah, we have what we call agreements in everything. It starts with the major TV networks. We have a contract with them. The major film companies, the commercial jingle industry, and the record labels. We have those big collective bargaining agreements. We also have something that covers touring musicians if they're in like a Broadway musical that's touring the country.
Okay.
There's a thing called Pamphlet B that covers that kind of work.
Okay.
But then, everything from local radio to local TV, you got to have a rate, or else you're negotiating from the bottom up.
Right.
So we have those local rates. Recording in Nashville is interesting because we have this culture of songwriters and demo sessions being done through the union, which frankly doesn't really happen that way in any other city in the world.
Okay.
It was just an organic system that came up where you can get a group of musicians in the studio for 3 hours, and if you're on a tight budget doing a demo session, you can get 6 or 7 songs in 3 hours, bang them out, and those guys grab their gear and they take an hour break and they go to another studio and do that, and it's amazing. Or you can sit there and really work 1 or 2 songs and make them unbelievable. But sometimes the demos are so good that they end up becoming records. And so the simplest way to describe it is we have 4 basic scales, low to high. Demo scale is the lowest. For a 3-hour session, you make $156 with the health and welfare and other, because every session has a $28 health and welfare payment that's just meant to help you with your health care. And then also a pension component. So a demo session, the scale is 156, but it pays about 200. Okay. That's what it'll cost the employer. And then the next one up is limited pressing, which is still a local agreement, but it allows them to release the recording because demo came from demonstration recording, as in I can play you this song and I can pitch you the song that the demo is of, or even I'm a producer and I want you to hear this demo I made, but you can't sell it. Unless it's so limited pressing is the scale's about $40 more, so that it's 196 or so. So it ends up being about 250 for a 3-hour session, and those are local agreements. And there's a ceiling there. If you get to 10,000 copies, whether it's single units or albums or physical product, if you get to 10,000, then there's an upgrade from the difference between limited pressing, number 2, to master scale, which is number 4. Okay. So then we get into, these are the national agreements that we have with the record labels and anybody independent artist that signs up. Okay. And so low budget master is one that actually came out of Nashville because the Christian labels were saying, we can't afford this huge rate you have. And so we negotiated something that's in between limited pressing and master. It was about 15 years ago or so. Okay. And so there's caveats are you have a $99,000 ceiling on the budget, which covers most records these days, and you have to file the budget in advance. And then master scale is the highest. And low budget pays it's about $260, and with the extras it comes to about $300, $350. Then master scale pays $460 about right now, and then with the extras a little over $500. But and then of course in session world where people are very popular, there is double scale where you can say, and every session has a leader. So there's at least one person is double scale in every session. Okay. But the player at one time, it's not so much now, but back when things were really rolling, it would be double scale session, which means everybody gets double pay. The leader would get the double pension payment, but everybody else would just get an overscale. So that's the basics. There's another one for single song overdub, which was designed for the whole file sharing home recording. Okay. And that's a negotiable agreement $100 song minimum, no maximum, with all the pension and everything built in.
Okay. Awesome.
So those are the basic scales.
Awesome. Okay, what about healthcare? We talked about retirement.
Right.
What
Well,
about
yeah,
healthcare?
this is something that we know is really important to any freelance, group. And so we've had a great healthcare consultant, R.J. Stillwell, since he was one of my very first calls when I took over in 2009, and just to consult and help people figure out. He was the first person that I ever met who could explain the Affordable Care Act and how it worked. And he came and gave a seminar to our members that was like really powerful. And so he's been acting as a consultant and helping people make the right decisions. But he was able to get some underwriting and create our own exclusive healthcare group with Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's a really good plan. It's a little bit more expensive than the bottom level ACA plans, but unlike all those which have a Tennessee only network, this has the Blue Cross Blue Shield nationwide network. So for someone, say, who's a touring musician, that's a real plus. And we've had quite a few people, especially kind of in the 40s, 50s generation, people in that age group come in and join who are in the music business. They are music professionals. They may not necessarily be professional musicians, but, we welcome those folks because, it helps just spread the culture that we're trying to do good things for people. We're not, I've yet to break any legs other than my own. I did that once.
Well, I think actually that leads me very easily into my next question, which is the Musicians Union isn't just for someone who plays an instrument in Nashville, correct?
That is true. That is true. Of course, we have branches all over the U.S. and Canada. Most locals are based around a symphony orchestra. A lot of the smaller locals are based on that. And we also have this thing called the Music Performance Trust Fund, which funds performances in places like hospitals, nursing homes, schools. And so, and coming out of the pandemic, the trust fund really stepped up, and we had an allotment of $80,000 for the year, and we used up almost all of it in the first 2 months, which is great because this is when people need the help. So yeah, it's definitely we're just trying to look out for folks the best we can. When the pandemic hit, and our Tennessee governor reluctantly decided to comply with the federal laws about letting freelance people to file for unemployment, the system was so antiquated and not set up for freelance people that we spent a lot of time helping hundreds of folks figure it out. And every time we'd deduce a new secret, hey, look, don't, if you get a voice, hang up, call until you get music, then somebody will actually answer the phone. I mean, whatever tricks we found. Wow. And to me, it's such a broad description. We're doing whatever we can to help musicians survive in a very challenging environment. Yeah. But that's true anywhere in the country. And I think one of the good things that's happening with the AFM right now is that I think we're communicating internally and sharing information and sharing ideas better than we ever have before. And that was kind of my pitch from the beginning of getting involved in this stuff, was it's about communication. Right. If you don't tell people what you do, how are they going to figure out what you do?
Right.
Didn't seem that complicated to me.
Well, I have one last question about the union, and then I have some more questions to just talk to you about generally with your experience in this town and as a musician.
Yeah.
But my last question about the union has to do with the union's advocacy when it comes to local and statewide and national legislation. But particularly I'm not sure what the official term is, but I know a lot of us talked about it as, the home studio zoning issue.
Yes.
And can you kind of explain, in a nutshell what that is and how the union and you were heavily involved in trying to make that right?
It was a very interesting thing. Nashville is a fairly young city as far as when it was incorporated, just in the 1950s. And so the codes they're not terribly thorough. And there's a list of allowable home businesses. And if you're not on that list, you're illegal. And there was also a restriction of how many people you could have in your house as a customer, how many customers you could have in your house. And it was really more to do with that than the noise regulations. And not long, about 10 years ago, one of our members, meaning well, went to the newspaper, had been bugging the newspaper about his successful home business. And so he got a nice write-up in the business section of the local newspaper. And the next day, Codes knocked on his door and said, "Hey, by the way, you're breaking the law. We're shutting you down." And so it kind of went through. He went to his council person, who went to some other ones, and then who came to me. And I ended up getting very involved in a proposal we made back in 2013 to fix this. And it just, we couldn't get the traction that we wanted, because there was this neighborhood advocacy group fighting against it, who didn't really understand that we're already here. We're already doing it. It's been happening all along. And we're good neighbors. We know how to be good neighbors. Not only that, we're trying to keep sounds out of our house, in addition to not wanting sounds to leave our house. And it's certainly way less annoying to some people than a teenage rock band in grandma's garage with the door open would be, or somebody who has huge parties every Friday night. So we ran against these neighborhood advocates who really didn't understand, and so it got shot down. It never came up for a vote. And then a few more incidents happened where people got busted, and one guy in particular, a guy named Lid Shaw, really started working every possible angle. They did a lawsuit that failed. He ended up getting involved with some other people, and all along, he knew that I'd been through this, so we were in the loop. And we're friends. I've worked at his studio, and so we just kept working on it and kept working on the council people, and finally, we were able to get some public hearings. And the new cry was, "This is Airbnb," and it's like, this is nothing like Airbnb, because Airbnb in some neighborhoods has been a real disaster. I get that. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. Nobody with a home studio wants to attract any attention, because there's a ton of gear in there. Nobody wants to do that. So it was really just like, we just had to keep going with the reality check, and we got other home businesses involved that had similar things, and we were able to get it passed right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think the last little push was, musicians got to work at home. Come on, please. And it did. It got through. But again, 10-year process. Some of these things take a long time. I got one person that owes a bunch of people money. I've been after him for 14 years, and he knows where I am.
Well, if he's watching this right now,
he's probably not. But it's just,
it's okay.
It's only because it's just sad. It's like, don't do that. Don't do that to people. And this is the whole thing that Nashville is based on. You work with your friends. I negotiate against people who I know and respect are my friends. We're not negotiating against each other. We're trying to come to a more evolved deal than we had the last time. And it's very interesting. I mean, but it can be really difficult too, because sometimes employers just have no soul. They have no soul. They just don't get it. And I got one situation I'm dealing with right now where it's just like, I have trouble even looking them in the eye and going, "You really think this is okay? All right, okay." So you just, I try to be consistent, because to me, that's what we have to do to preserve this incredible ecosystem that kind of fell out of the sky into Nashville. It could have been Memphis. It should have been Muscle Shoals. I mean, I love both those places. In New York and LA, I mean, they're great, but they're very fragmented in their ways. This is a real community, and I as a kid that moved around a whole bunch, this is my home, and I'm going to protect it.
Well, I said I wouldn't ask anything else about the union, but I thought about one follow-up question, which is, do you have to be a member of the union to work in this town as a musician?
No, it's a right to work state, which means it's very interesting. The short version is, we can't restrict anybody's ability to work under our agreements. We can't, and we can't demand that they join. We can ask them for an equivalent of work dues, but we cannot demand it. We can only say, "Gosh, you just made $1,000. Work dues on this should be $30. We'd really like it if you'd pay it. Maybe you'd want to consider joining the union." There are some people who just don't understand what it is, and maybe only work once in a blue moon. There, on the other side, there are people who know exactly what it is, who are getting a pension, who have quit the union, won't pay work dues, and they're still building their retirement at our expense, and that's difficult, and it's really, it's legally okay to do that, but it's ethically kind of wrong. And it's sort of like, it's like these, big company that does a soundtrack for a big video game and then just pays everybody what an independent artist pays them, rather than putting them on a contract and giving them an opportunity for pension and the reuse of the music. Because when you do something non-union, that gets used again and again and again. Nobody's going to get anything except the people who ripped off the musicians.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's what we're fighting against. But I try to be nice about it.
Sure. Well, so I'm going to ask some, I guess, more just from your experience type questions. And I think the first one that I want to start with is, in your experience, what does success in this town as a musician look like? Because I know from a lot of people outside looking in, they think success is a record deal and, a million albums sold. But and in my experience, and well, I'll just leave the question at that and ask you.
Well, I mean, I would say from just a global standpoint, it's being able to make a living doing what you love is the definition of success for me. But I think what has changed is there was a time when people just kind of did when I came to town, there were studio players and there were road players, and there was like never the twain shall meet. That has completely changed over the years, where you've got an established artist going out with a band that's half veteran session players and half people that have worked with it for 20 years. Sure. It all mixes up. Jason Aldean broke the mold by using the guys who played on his demos to be his band to play on the records, to be his touring band. And, what an incredible relationship those folks have. Sure. And Don Williams kind of made that move from having a studio band and a live band into my live band is my studio band. But nowadays, people make a living doing a bunch of different things. You do a little bit of this. You might do a little songwriting. You might do a little producing. And you're doing some overdubs for some people over the internet. And then you're taking the occasional gigs that you like to do. Or, you're taking a whole bunch of gigs that add up to a living. I think now you're seeing people doing a lot of different things, and I think the pandemic has taught people other ways to make a living. I've heard numbers of stories of people who have started their own new business that's doing well, and they're going, well, I don't know if I want to go back on the road. So I really think nobody can say what success means. Some of the most successful people you see are maybe some of the most unhappiest, miserable people, and you just don't know. And ultimately, we can only define that for ourselves. But I think Nashville's the place where different doors open up. I mean, I knew what a session player was, but I never imagined that I could be one. It took a really long period of time, and some people who took chances on me. Yeah. Guy Clark, when I first got my weird stand-up electric bass, he goes, I like it. Play it on everything. I was like, okay, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And so, I think this is still a place where you can come with with a set of dreams that isn't necessarily narrow. Yeah. And many things can happen. I mean, there's so many side roads, and you really just have to try to be aware of where you are in your own journey. What I tell people a lot of times is, if you come to Nashville and you have another way to make a living that doesn't kill your soul and that gives you enough time, you can make a very different set of musical decisions than you would if you're just hand-to-mouth every single gig and I'm stuck out here and I can't get back to Nashville. Because when you're on the road, Nashville is turning, and you come back, you're where you were when you left, and the wheel is turned. Yep. And so you got to be aware of that. Don's gig was perfect because he worked 80 days a year, and we had time to work. And he told us, he was probably the only artist that's ever said, I'm not going to be doing this forever. You guys ought to be finding some other things to do. Like, got it. I got the memo. Thanks, boss.
Well, you touched on this a little bit, actually, in just a few sentences ago, but you said, or let me just ask the question. I know that you work a lot with young musicians who come to town. They come and ask you for advice or help and whatnot. If someone, let's say they were in their early 20s and they played bass or they played drums or guitar, and they said, I want to move to Nashville and I want to make music my career. You said a little bit, but can we kind of go down that path a little bit about what the advice would be to someone like that?
Well, I think you've really got to, it's the old, big fish, small pond thing, where you've really got to be honest with yourself about your strengths and, more importantly, your weaknesses, and figure out if you need to learn more about the things you're not so good at, or you need to direct your energy towards your skill set, and being open-minded to it. I think being willing to ask people questions, and knowing how far to go and not to be a complete pest or a pain, but I think just being willing to look at yourself pretty objectively and go, immerse yourself, go hear things, go see things, talk to people. It's not all about Lower Broadway. Yeah, there's some things you can learn down there. I learned about the number system down there because I didn't know what it was, and there was suddenly the singer was flashing these numbers behind his back. I'm like, what's he doing? It's like, what's that? So, but again, it's like figure out what you think you want to do and then learn as much as you can about it, and try to find somebody who can mentor you in some fashion. It doesn't have to be it's just more like, like when I was just, hey, what note is that? I don't know what you're doing there. What, can you tell me what that is? Just being able to ask questions. And when I was hitting people up for work, I would always say, hey man, here's my card. I really like your stuff. If I can ever help you, let me know. Not, hey man, I really want to be your next bass player. Yeah. And it'd be like, hey, if your drummer doesn't show up, call me and I'll help you find a drummer, and maybe your bass player won't show up either and you can call me. I mean, I just always tried to just present that kind of, hey, I'm just trying to do some cool stuff. How you doing? Yeah. And so I think it's really, I think for some folks, the famous Garth Brooks story, how he kind of came here and hit the wall and went back to Oklahoma, and then second time round, everything worked out okay.
Well, I guess on that same note, is there anything that you would tell people to avoid?
I would avoid signing any contracts that you don't understand.
That's a great piece of advice.
I would definitely avoid signing anything that has the words work for hire. Okay. That basically means whatever I gave you right now is all you're ever going to get, no matter what happens. And Nashville's been built on things happening. Not on things not happening. Right. I think that's that's really important, and just to, again, keep an open mind and be prepared to be humbled, and use it as a lesson. I will never forget the first time I heard Victor Wooten play the bass. I will never forget the first time I heard Edgar Meyer sitting in with Newgrass Revival and playing stuff on the bow up, and. Yeah. Victor was playing. I just saw him the other day. We've been friends for a long time. He used to play at this little vegetarian restaurant and just play over in the corner. And I'm like, what is that? What's that? So, it's this kind of place. Billy Sheehan lives here now. He's moved here and he's loving it. He was very happy to come here. And I think a lot of folks, and I've been so blessed to get to work with these people who are my heroes, Peter Frampton called me up out of the blue one day. I thought somebody was putting me on. He goes, Adrian Ballou told me you could play anything. Would you like to do a session? It's like, yes, I would, Mr. Frampton. And I've gotten to work with him a few times. Steve Winwood was just such a sweetheart. Wow. And these are guys that could certainly cop an attitude if they wanted to. And people, it's always refreshing when a star is a really nice person. And that happens. I don't know, maybe I'm just lucky, but to me it's happened a lot more than the other way around. It's only been very few exceptions. I must have had some kind of filter on my phone or something.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I think that we're coming to a good ending point here, and I guess the last thing that I want to ask you is there anything that you want to share? Is there anything that you want to promote or say about the union or about yourself, about music that you're working on, or anything that you're doing right now?
Well, I would just say that, I'm aware more than ever that I've been really blessed in my time here in Nashville. And I've always enjoyed doing my own stuff on the side. That was always a fun thing for me. So I have this little bitty record label called Airwave Records. We've put out 2 videos and 12 albums, very wide range of stuff. And it's all on davepomeroy.com along with a bunch of videos. And there's a YouTube channel too. And, again, I think music still has the power to change things. And I think we're at a very critical time in our society, in our culture. And we need to be looking for the common ground. of things. And music can create that sometimes, where people who can't even have a conversation without getting into it both love the same song. And they may be miles apart or right next to each other, but they're both feeling it. Yeah. And that's a start. Yeah. You know, and I think it's really true. And you know, if I am blessed to keep on living for a long time, I'm going to keep doing this as long as I can. It's very important to me that we do have this renewal, and we've got some great young musicians, diverse musicians coming in and joining. Just in the last few weeks, we've had an incredible Latin percussion band leader join, and also a Nigerian singer, writer, producer, who's just wonderful, who's been working around town and playing with, you know, I got a young big band guy who he put together a big band, and we were able to fund their July 4th performance. And you know, it's great when you have, you know, you see a big band and you see a couple of older guys as kind of ringers, and then you see some in between, and you see some young players you've never seen before, and he hits the downbeat, and bam, there it is. So, you know, I don't want to say any names because I don't want to exclude anybody, but there's just so much great energy in this town, and you know, I'm glad that you know, you're so interested in digging in a little deeper, because I'm sure somebody coming to Nashville the way I did, knowing one person and not really having a clue, it could be very intimidated, especially now, you know, because in the old days, you know, songwriters could walk up and down Music Row, knock on doors, and get somebody to hear their songs, whereas they stopped doing that a while ago because of, you know, lawsuits over similar song titles and stuff. But, you know, I always thought that it was important to do my own stuff, to follow my own artistic things, and my stuff is kind of all over the map, and that's the way I like it. And then when I go in to work for someone else, I'm in their world. I'm in their orbit. And I think that was one of the things that I remember in my sort of middle days of sessions. Some of the more established guys, why are you out doing all them gigs, man? And it's like, oh man, you know, it's like, if I got to tell you, I can't tell you, because I love it, and I'm learning stuff on those gigs. And the next time I'm in the studio and somebody goes, hey man, I want something kind of weird here, man, some kind of sound, you know, some sort of outer space. I'm like, hey, hang on, give me a sec. And I pull up my harmonized sound, and I get out my little rock, and I start bowing the strings and getting this. He goes, yeah, man, that's it. And it's like, I would never learn that if I wasn't in a crazy band that played for 10 years, seeing how many weird sounds we could make. So, you know, it's just, to me, it all comes down to that thing of follow your heart, you know, follow your instinct, follow the Lord, whatever you think of it as, you know, the universe. We are so blessed. I mean, this morning I was at the dedication of John Lewis Way, where they named part of the street by the Ryman after John Lewis, and it was, you know, the year after his passing, and you know, and some of his contemporaries and people were still. You get up and talk, and you realize how easy we have it. That I'm never going to stop fighting for the little guy, and you know, and try to give the bass player a little respect. You know.
I think that's the best place for us to end this.
Bass players need love too.
Guitar player here.
Yeah.
I'm going to include links to a lot of the things that we talked about in this video in the description. So if you've made it this far, Dave, do you want to play something for us?
Sure, I'd be honored.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. I got a date with a bass. I won't be coming over to your place. See, there's this melody I'm trying to chase. I got a date with a bass. Yes, I know that it's late, and I promised I'd be there by 8. I'm really sorry that I made you wait. I got a date with a bass, just me and my bass. It might be a little strange, but from an early age I've been in love with that sound, so big and round, and so low down. I got a date with a bass. I'm sorry I won't see your pretty face. Nothing but this could ever take your place. I got a date with a bass, just me and my bass. It might be hard to understand, but I'm a simple man, and I'm gonna lose my mind if I don't give my fingers enough time. They got a date with a bass. I hope you don't think that I'm a player just 'cause I'm playing. It ain't the same thing, babe, I'm really playing. I'm just saying, I got a date with a bass. I won't be coming over to your place. Nothing but this could ever take your place. I got a date with a bass, just me and my bass. A date with a bass, just me and my bass. Just me and my bass. I got a date with a bass. I won't be coming over to your place. See, there's this melody I'm trying to chase. I got a date with a bass. Yes, I know that it's late, and I promised I'd be there by 8. I'm really sorry that I made you wait. I got a date with a bass, just me and my bass. It might be a little strange, but from an early age, I've been in love with that sound so big and round and so low down. I got a date with a bass. I'm sorry I won't see your pretty face. Nothing but this could ever take your place. I got a date with a bass, just me and my bass. It might be hard to understand, but I'm a simple man, and I'm gonna lose my mind if I don't give my fingers enough time. They got a date with a bass.